The ink on Rob Reiner's will barely had time to dry before his children turned on each other. When the legendary director and his wife Michele were found murdered in their Brentwood mansion on December 14, 2025, the immediate arrest of their son Nick seemed like the end of a tragic story. But it was just the beginning. Because hidden inside that will was a decision so controversial, so unexpected, that it threatens to tear apart whatever's left of the Reiner family. Nick Reiner, the son who allegedly killed his parents, was set to inherit the largest portion of their $200 million estate. Not Jake, the eldest. Not Romy, the daughter who stayed close to the family. Nick, the one with addiction issues and a history of instability. And now his siblings want answers. More importantly, they want his share of the money. Rob Reiner built his fortune over decades. From acting alongside Carol O'Connor in All in the Family to directing classics like When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, and A Few Good Men, he became one of Hollywood's most respected figures. His wife Michele, a photographer and philanthropist, came from her own wealthy background. Together, they accumulated assets worth roughly $200 million, including multiple properties, production company stakes, and extensive investment portfolios. The Reiner family looked perfect from the outside. For children, a blended family that seemed to work. Tracy Reiner came into Rob's life through his first marriage to actress Penny Marshall. Rob adopted Tracy, raising her as his own even after the divorce. Then came his marriage to Michele Singer in 1989, and they had 3 biological children together: Jake, Nick, and Romy. But according to sources close to the family, things were never as harmonious as they appeared. Nick struggled with substance abuse from his teenage years. Multiple stints in rehabilitation centers. Erratic behavior that worried his parents constantly. Friends of Rob and Michele say the couple poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into treatment programs, therapy, and support systems for Nick over the years. Jake, the oldest son, went into film production but apparently never achieved the success his father had hoped for. Those familiar with the family dynamics describe a complicated relationship between Jake and Rob, one marked by high expectations and perceived disappointments. Romy, the youngest biological child, maintained a lower profile, working in art curation in New York, physically and emotionally distant from the Los Angeles family drama. And then there's Tracy, the adopted daughter. Now in her 50s, Tracy had a modest acting career, appearing in several of her adoptive father's films. But her relationship with Michele was reportedly strained. Michele never formally adopted Tracy, and some family friends suggest Michele viewed Tracy differently than her own biological children. That distinction, subtle but present, may have planted seeds of resentment that are now sprouting in the wake of Rob and Michele's deaths. Those seeds began to surface almost immediately after the funeral arrangements were finalized. According to individuals familiar with the early probate process, the first major confrontation happened behind closed doors, not in a courtroom. A meeting between attorneys turned tense when the structure of Rob's estate plan was explained in detail. While the will named all 4 children as beneficiaries, it did not divide assets equally. Nick's share was larger. Significantly larger. The explanation, included in supplemental estate documents, centered on concern. Rob believed Nick would not be able to support himself long-term. He feared that without financial protection, Nick would be vulnerable to relapse, exploitation, or homelessness. To prevent that, Rob placed much of Nick's inheritance into a managed trust, overseen by professional fiduciaries, with scheduled disbursements and strict limitations. From Rob's perspective, it was a safety net. From Jake and Romy's perspective, it felt like punishment for being functional. Jake reportedly questioned why years of stability, responsibility, and independence resulted in a smaller share. Friends say he asked whether being the easy child had made him invisible, whether he was expected to accept less because he asked for less. Romy's reaction was more restrained but no less painful. Those close to her describe a sense of quiet disbelief. She had maintained regular contact with her parents, even while living on the opposite coast. She showed up. She stayed involved. And yet, in the final accounting of her parents' lives, she felt sidelined. Tracy's situation was more precarious. Legally, Tracy stood on solid ground. Adoption made her Rob's daughter under California law, entitled to inheritance on the same basis as his biological children. Emotionally, however, her position was far more vulnerable. Michele's death complicated everything. Several longtime friends of the family have said that while Rob treated Tracy as his daughter without hesitation, Michele's relationship with her was distant. There was no public rift, no dramatic falling out. Just a consistent sense of separation. Michele reportedly kept Tracy at arm's length, particularly when it came to financial matters. That distance now mattered. Because while Rob's will acknowledge Tracy as a beneficiary, Michele's estate plan reportedly did not include her in the same way. That discrepancy raised immediate questions. Were Rob and Michele fully aligned? Or had they made separate decisions that reflected different priorities? Those questions became more urgent once Nick was arrested. Just hours after police arrived at the Brentwood mansion, Nick Reiner was taken into custody and charged with the murders of both parents. The news shocked the public. For the family, it froze everything in place. Under California law, a legal doctrine known as the Slayer Statute prevents anyone who intentionally kills another person from inheriting from them. If applied, Nick would be treated as if he had died before his parents. His share would be redistributed among the remaining beneficiaries. But intent is the key word. Nick's defense team has indicated that they plan to focus heavily on his long history of addiction and mental health issues. If they succeed in arguing that he was not capable of forming intent, the statute may not apply. That possibility has kept the estate in limbo. For Jake and Romy, the uncertainty is unbearable. According to legal analysts, even if Nick avoids a criminal conviction, the matter does not end there. A civil court can apply the Slayer Statute using a lower burden of proof. It only needs to be shown that it is more likely than not that Nick intentionally caused his parents' deaths. That means the siblings may pursue a separate civil action, regardless of what happens in criminal court. And while that battle plays out, another conflict simmers beneath the surface. Because if Nick is removed, the question becomes who benefits. Jake and Romy's attorneys have reportedly begun reviewing whether Tracy's share can be challenged or reduced. The arguments are delicate. Adoption is legally equal to biology. Courts rarely entertain challenges based solely on bloodline. But probate disputes are rarely fought on clean principles alone. They are fought on leverage. Tracy, aware of her position, has remained publicly silent. Her legal team has advised against statements. Silence preserves flexibility. Speaking too soon risks hardening opposition. Behind the scenes, however, sources suggest Tracy feels isolated. With Rob and Michele gone, she is navigating a family that no longer feels like hers. The same adoption that once gave her security now feels like a vulnerability. As the estate remains frozen and legal costs mount, pressure continues to build. Properties sit idle. Investments are managed by third parties. No one feels in control. And with every passing week, grief gives way to strategy. This is no longer just about what Rob Reiner intended. It is about how his children interpret fairness, responsibility, and belonging when the only thing left to divide is money. As the weeks passed, the tone of communication between the siblings changed. Early messages that once carried cautious sympathy grew shorter, then colder. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Attorneys became the primary messengers, and every exchange carried legal weight. According to people familiar with the situation, one of the first strategic moves came from Jake's legal team. They requested a full forensic accounting of the estate. On its face, this was routine. Large estates almost always go through this step. But the timing was deliberate. A forensic accounting slows everything down. It freezes distributions. It forces every asset into the light. For Jake, delay was leverage. Romy's attorneys followed suit, filing parallel requests that ensured nothing moved without consensus. No property sales. No trust disbursements. No adjustments. The estate was effectively locked. Nick, sitting in custody and awaiting trial, had no direct control over any of this. His trust distributions were suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. Trustees were instructed to hold funds except for basic legal and medical expenses. Even if Nick was legally entitled, he could not touch the money. That detail mattered to the public narrative. To many observers, it looked like Nick was already benefiting from the estate. In reality, he was not. Everything tied to him was frozen. That did little to calm his siblings. Their concern was not what Nick had now. It was what he might have later. Behind closed doors, conversations turned blunt. Jake reportedly questioned whether Rob had been manipulated, whether years of fear had clouded his judgment, whether protecting Nick had crossed into enabling him. Those thoughts were not shared publicly, but they circulated among attorneys and advisors. Romy's position was more complicated. According to friends, she struggled with guilt. She loved Nick. She worried about him. At the same time, she could not ignore the reality of what he was accused of doing. Supporting a legal challenge against him felt necessary, but emotionally corrosive. And Tracy found herself in a different kind of bind. Her attorneys advised her to align with Jake and Romy on the issue of Nick's eligibility. That alignment made sense on paper. If Nick was removed, everyone else stood to gain. But alignment came with strings. Cooperation meant silence on certain points. It meant not pushing back when questions about her own share surfaced. Those questions did surface. Sources close to the negotiations say Jake's team raised concerns about Michele's intentions. Michele's estate plan, separate from Rob's, reportedly favored her biological children. Tracy's absence from certain trust provisions was not accidental. It reflected a line Michele never crossed. That distinction became a talking point. The argument was subtle. No one claimed Tracy did not belong. Instead, they asked whether Rob would have wanted Tracy to inherit assets tied specifically to Michele's wealth. Properties purchased during the marriage. Investments made jointly. Accounts that existed before Tracy was part of the household. It was not a legal argument as much as a moral one. Tracy's attorneys pushed back hard. Under California law, community property rules govern much of what Rob and Michele accumulated together. Adoption established Tracy as Rob's heir, not a guest in the family. Attempting to carve her out based on sentiment would not hold up in court. Still, the challenge served its purpose. It introduced doubt. Probate cases often hinge on how long parties can endure pressure. Legal fees climb quickly. Emotional exhaustion sets in. People begin to calculate what peace is worth in dollars. By early spring, estimates suggested the estate had already spent millions on legal costs alone. Trustees billed hourly. Accountants billed hourly. Attorneys billed hourly. Every delay enriched professionals while draining the family. Public attention intensified. Media coverage shifted from shock to analysis. Commentators dissected Rob's choices. Was prioritizing Nick compassionate or reckless? Did unequal treatment plant resentment that later exploded? Could the structure of the will itself be blamed? None of those questions had legal answers. But they shaped how the story was told. The comparison that surfaced repeatedly was not flattering. Observers drew parallels to other high-profile inheritance battles where siblings turned on each other with brutal efficiency. Once that frame took hold, it was hard to shake. Inside the criminal case, developments added another layer of uncertainty. Nick's defense team requested extensive psychiatric evaluations. Medical records spanning decades were subpoenaed. Therapists were called. Doctors were interviewed. The defense narrative focused on impairment, not denial. Prosecutors, meanwhile, pushed back. They argued that planning and execution mattered more than diagnosis. That addiction and mental illness did not automatically erase intent. That the evidence would speak for itself. Every filing in criminal court echoed through probate court. Jake and Romy's attorneys monitored the proceedings closely. A guilty verdict would simplify everything. An insanity defense victory would complicate it beyond measure. As months passed, the siblings' positions hardened. Jake became increasingly vocal behind the scenes. According to sources, he expressed frustration not only with Nick, but with what he viewed as years of emotional imbalance. He believed Rob had spent so much time managing crises that he overlooked the children who did not create them. Romy withdrew further. Friends say she stopped engaging in discussions that felt transactional. Her focus shifted to preserving her own sense of integrity, even as legal realities demanded participation. Tracy faced the most isolating path. She was defending her right to belong while also navigating alliances that could turn against her at any moment. Supporting the challenge against Nick strengthened her position temporarily. But she knew that once Nick was out of the picture, scrutiny would return to her. That awareness shaped every decision. By summer, settlement talks began quietly. No one wanted to be seen as conceding, but everyone wanted an end. Proposals circulated. Percentages shifted. Conditions were attached. Trust structures were revised. Nothing stuck. The fundamental issue remained unresolved. Fairness meant different things to different people. For Jake, fairness meant recognition. For Romy, it meant balance. For Tracy, it meant legitimacy. For Nick, whose voice was absent, fairness was something others argued about on his behalf. As of now, the estate remains unresolved. Criminal proceedings continue. Civil strategies remain in motion. No distributions have been finalized. No peace has been reached. What began as a private family matter has become a prolonged reckoning with choices made long before December 14, 2025. Rob Reiner spent his life telling stories about relationships, loyalty, and human flaws. In death, he left behind one story he could not control. A story where love, fear, and money collided, and where the ending remains unwritten.